No problem.
Good morning. Welcome back to the Retirement Report. I'm Hank Parrott, your host. You know, one of the things I talked about just before the break was understanding, okay, that a financial decision first and foremost, and then comes the tax piece. So an example, when we're just talking about a strategy for still being able to write off mortgage interest, for instance, and pay off a bunch of debt is through refinancing rather than a home equity line, which now the IRS has changed rules and you can no longer do. All right, but the other part is making sure what the, you know, it doesn't mean you want to go out and get, well, here's the example. If you have high interest debt like credit cards or maybe cars or whatever it is that you're paying higher than what that mortgage interest is going to be and getting no, you know, tax benefit whatsoever, then that could make sense. But here's the other part. Overall, I mean, as a strategy, the goal is to pay off your debt.
Yes.
Not to take maybe 5-year loans and stretch them out over 30 years. That's not a good strategy, okay? If you've got, ideally it would be to pay off those debts in a shorter amount of time rather than, you know, rolling it into a mortgage. Unless, now if you've got a, you know, and this again, the financial part, if you've got a 30-year mortgage, maybe you're 20 or 25 years into paying it, and you take out a new mortgage with the same payoff time or less, like a 15-year fixed mortgages right now, last time I looked, you could get a 3% rate, fixed rate, no points on a 15-year fixed mortgage. So now if I had a 20-year and I could roll that into a 15, reduce my payments and pay off some debt in the process, maybe that's a good strategy, but I would do an analysis. Usually if I have younger clients come in for the first time and we're talking about paying off debt, I'm more interested in how fast can we pay it off than rolling it into a mortgage. I'd rather have a plan that says we're going to pay it off faster, because in the end, even though it's higher interest, if it's over a shorter period of time, net, I may still pay less out of pocket on the interest paid than I would if I rolled it into a lower interest mortgage but was paying it out over 15 or 20 years. So that makes sense? So the financial decision comes first, then comes these other strategies and how we can use those. And this is going to we're going to talk about this in a lot of different areas. One of those being we're going to get into is charitable giving and talking about some strategies there. But here's one to think of with tax efficient investing. It's the same thing. When you're putting money aside and you're concerned about, you know, first off, we set up portfolios that are more tax efficient. I mentioned indexing being more tax efficient than active strategies. That can be a big deal for you over time, all right? As how to take advantage also of capital gains tax rates and understanding how they work when it comes to your investments. What I see too often, though, is where someone, let's say as an example, you've got a $100,000 capital gain on some investments. And and to do that, let's say that you've had it for a very long time, and maybe you've doubled your investment. Okay, maybe your cost base, $200,000, and you got a cost basis of $100,000 in capital gains. You're worried you're going to pay a $15,000 tax when you sell those securities. However, you look at those also, and you're worried that maybe it's risky. And we're heading in, we're in the longest bull market in history. We're heading at some point into a bear, most likely, just cyclically speaking, in the next few years. It's going to happen. It always, that's the way the markets work. So if if you think about that bear market, the last two were drops of 46 and 55%. So imagine losing half of that. So there's your $200,000. You're holding on to something very risky that you could lose $100,000 because you don't want to pay 15. See, this is where, again, the financial decision is more important first, and then we look. Now, we may want to stretch it out.
That's what I was just going to say, because I know I've walked into your office more than once, and because we have a 0% capital gains on long-term capital gains, and you do, I mean, we never know what the market's going to bring, but there are some situations where maybe your total income is 65 in the household, and you've got 30,000 that you could turn around into capital gains. That may put you in a 0% capital gains on that. And then maybe the next year you still have to pay tax on the remaining or whatever. But there are some ways, especially if you're proactive, to be able to do that and other things that you do with conversions and things as well.
Absolutely. So in fact, here's another option for you. Think of this, and we'll use blend these two examples together that Dr. Friday just talked about and that I was talking about. Say you got that $100,000 gain. We're heading towards the end of the year. Maybe your income, combined taxable income, is going to be under 50. Now you could take 50 this year, pay 0 tax. And 50 in January, few months, right? 0 tax. That 100,000 that would have been subject to a 15,000 in tax, we just zeroed out with that strategy. Imagine we did it over 3 years, 35, 35, 35. Whatever, you know, we do look at those things as well. Financial decision states that, okay, this is a little more risk I want to bear, and I want to get out, and I'm going to be watching. Yeah. And we go ahead, let's do a strategy to minimize or eliminate the taxes on it as we go. We start implementing the strategy. Now, if we see something there in the market that's saying, uh-oh, you know, I think this is going to be bad, then, you know, taxes come in second part. We're going to preserve your capital first and foremost. All right, some things we want to talk about as well. Family-related tax rule changes regarding children, education, high-earning couples, divorce, retirement, estate planning, all of these things. So let's dive into that and see how many we can click off here. Okay, the first one is the child tax credit. It doubled. So if you have a child that's 17 and under, you used to get $1,000 for each child. Now it is $2,000. So that is great. Don't ask me why it's 17 and under instead of 18, where everyone says, wait, my child is 18, they're still in the household, they're still in high school, why don't I get them? I don't have a good answer for you for that one. The other side, the IRS wants more money. Well, that's it. They basically, every little thing they can do. The theory I was told by a revenue officer was at 17, a child should be out there trying to work. Now, you and I both know, and I guarantee you I wasn't working at 17. I was supposed to be making grades. That's what my father said. You know, if you don't make the grades, then sure, you go get a job. But as long as I made the grades, I wasn't expected to have to go get a real job, but it was a job. I mean, for me to make good grades, it was a lot of work. So the second part of that is just saying, it wasn't like something I just, easy, huh? It wasn't necessarily, it wasn't like some of my sibs that basically could test out and apparently get straight A's. Play hooky and go pass the test. I had one of those, to be honest. He seemed to just be able to ace every test, and we don't even know when he read the material, but anyways. The other was, we talked about the personal exemption. We all know we lost the personal exemption, which means that if you have a child that is 17 and older, then you weren't going to get anything. Well, you get $500 credit. So if you're in the 15% tax bracket or 12, 15, 10, then that's a wash. Basically, it's the same amount. The $500 credit worked out to the same as the $4,050 deduction. So that was, but as you get older, the nice thing about this really came into, they before used to consider middle class 75, a married couple 110. They bumped that up to $200,000 for a single person, $400,000. Do you see that? No marriage penalty on this particular one. $400,000 for a married couple. So I mean, everybody, most individuals are now going to get the advantage of having the children and still getting that child credit or that deduction. You know, one of the areas too that we talk about, and I have clients ask about this one, and some of you may have 529 plans where you want to help with, you know, whether it's parents for children or many times grandparents for grandchildren. This is an area where you can put money in. It's not a deductible expense, but it's it allows you to put more money in than any other type of educational savings account, for instance. And it grows tax deferred and can be tax free when you take it out for using for those educational expenses. Here's the thing. One of the things that, and that can be great if you've got, but there's so many restrictions and limitations on it as well, not to mention if you're saving for, you know, young children. Right. What if they don't go to college? What, you know, what happens then? Is there a, you know, there would be penalties potentially. Did change it so you can do K through 12 now. So that's one, you know, there is the private school and the parochial schools. So a lot of us that may have kids that are in that, we can contribute to that. And then, so one of the downsides that we had looked at before about the college part, the new tax law is helping with, but again, it's tied to being private school as opposed to public school. Right. So if you've got that, this is, if you've got 529s out there, and you have the ability, by the way, with a 529, as you may be well aware, but if you're looking at it, you can, you know, let's say you've got 3 grandchildren as an example, you know, each have a, you're putting in for each of them, one doesn't, you know, decides to go a different route. The other, you can shift that over to the other 2. In other words, you can change who's going to receive the money as long as it's being used for, again, educational expenses, and now that includes K-12 private tuition as well. Personally, when it comes to 529s, there are times, you know, exceptions to this where it can be useful, and we look at that. keeping in mind that when it comes to 529s, one, advisors, your financial advisor for the most part, they don't talk a lot about them. They don't get into them because we cannot charge you for that advice. We cannot charge you a fee to help manage those. So these are state plans. Tennessee's, by the way, is improving, and they're getting more proactive about trying to get people familiar with the Tennessee 529 plan and the investments available. Each state has, well, not every state, but the states that do have 529s, you would want to shop because what you're able to invest in differs state to state as well. And that's one of the biggest potential risk to 529s is you may have very limited investment options, which could be counterproductive to growing this money over time. This is where I like using your retirement accounts. Roth IRAs is a great one, in fact, for this purpose. Now I can get the same advantages. I can put money in, right, in my own Roth IRA. I can put money in that I'm going to earmark for my grandkids, let's say. I can do estate planning documents, in fact, to make sure that planning gets done. In other words, if something happens to me, that they're still going to receive those funds. I give the same advantage, right? I'm putting the money in. It doesn't. I don't get any tax break. It does grow tax deferred, and as long as it's in there following the rules for 5 years, then everything. And even if it's less than 5 years, the earnings are the only thing. The principal I can still take out tax-free. It's only the earnings that, so I could take out principal to pay initially, get past the 5 years, and have access to all. So again, see how understanding these rules can be so important to you?
More control too than the 529, in my opinion. Much more control.
Now you've got, now it's yours to control. You can do what you want. If they change their mind, there's no penalty to you for that money being now locked up in a 529 that you can't get at it. So you can get all the same tax advantages, more control over the dollars, less worried about what the grandkids are going to do, and it makes, and I'll tell you, it has some great advantages as well if there's any residual or leftover dollars, whether you want to provide that to them. Maybe set up their own Roth IRAs at some point as well, and there's some ways you can do that. All right, so this is where, when it comes to planning, let's see how we're doing. I want to make sure we get into charitable before we're done today, so we're keeping an eye on that. All right, before we go there, one other change I want to talk about. So that takes care of the 529. Understand that. Again, you know, if you get with your advisor and talk to them about the pros and cons of a 529 plan versus funding a Roth IRA for yourself and how that can benefit you. Now, Roth IRAs, if you're funding for yourself, you are going to be more capped out as far as how much you can put in. One of the limitations. However, keep in mind too, you can do that for yourself, for your spouse. If another way to look at Roth conversions can be done, that you can pump up money into it for that purpose. So there's a lot of ways that you can still accomplish it. You want to look at the whole picture. All right, we're going to take a break. One of the things we want, two areas I want to make sure I get into. One is the new effect with regard to divorce. Unfortunately, we're going to talk about that. And then we're also going to talk about charitable, because there's some great strategies that can be used here. So if you're giving to charity, maybe your church, as far as tithing, whatever it might be, show you some ways that you can make sure more of that money goes to the charity and not having some of that diverted over into taxes. Again, with regard to what we were talking about with itemizing, here's a sweet one that will help you benefit even without itemizing. But first, a break. Join us here. We'll be right back on the Retirement Report.